The grand ballroom of the Reynolds Tower sparkled with holiday cheer as the annual company party hit full swing. Soft golden lights hung from crystal chandeliers, casting a warm glow over the crowd of employees dressed in their finest. In one corner, a small jazz band played quietly, while a lone pianist worked through classic holiday tunes on the magnificent grand piano that dominated the center of the room. Among the crowd stood Mike Chen, a 28-year-old finance graduate who had joined Reynolds Enterprises just 3 years ago. He nursed a glass of champagne, making small talk with his co-workers from the accounting department. Despite the festive atmosphere, Mike couldn't help but feel slightly out of place. These company parties were always filled with forced laughter and office politics that made him uncomfortable. "He's here," someone whispered, and the entire room seemed to shift its attention toward the main doors. Harrison Reynolds, the 65-year-old founder and CEO of Reynolds Enterprises, made his entrance. Tall and imposing with a full head of silver hair, he commanded attention without even trying. Reynolds had built his company from nothing into a business worth billions, and stories about his eccentric behavior were legendary throughout the industry. "Good evening, everyone," Reynolds boomed, his voice carrying across the ballroom. "I hope you're all enjoying yourselves on the company dime." The crowd laughed obligingly as Reynolds made his way through the party, stopping to chat briefly with executives and board members. He was known for his unpredictable nature, sometimes charming and generous, other times cutting and critical. Mike tried to blend into the background. In 3 years, he'd never actually spoken directly to the big boss, and he preferred to keep it that way. He'd heard too many stories of Reynolds publicly humiliating employees who caught his attention for the wrong reasons. As the night wore on, it became clear that Reynolds had been drinking heavily. His voice grew louder, his gestures more exaggerated, and his comments more pointed. Eventually, he made his way to the piano, where a young musician was playing a subtle rendition of Winter Wonderland. "This is supposed to be a party," Reynolds interrupted, leaning against the piano. "Why are you playing like you're at a funeral?" The pianist, a professional hired for the evening, smiled uncomfortably and attempted to pick up the tempo. Reynolds wasn't satisfied. No. You're still playing it wrong. This is how you do it." He tried to reach over the pianist to demonstrate, but knocked over a glass of wine that had been set on the piano, spilling red liquid across the keys. The musician jumped up to avoid the splash, clearly offended. "Sir, I don't think, just play." Reynolds laughed, oblivious to the tension he was creating. The room had gone quiet, everyone watching the uncomfortable scene unfold. The pianist, with as much dignity as he could muster, closed his sheet music. "I think I'm done for the evening. Happy holidays." He walked away from the piano, grabbing his coat and heading for the exit. Reynolds seemed genuinely surprised. "Where are you going?" "We're paying you good money." But the musician was already gone, leaving an awkward silence in the ballroom. The other members of the small band looked at each other uncertainly, not knowing whether to continue without their pianist. Reynolds turned to face the crowd, who were now trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed the scene. His face flushed red. From embarrassment or alcohol, no one could tell. "Well," he announced loudly, "apparently professional musicians are too sensitive these days." He took another long sip from his glass. "Who needs him anyway? I bet there's someone in this room who can play this thing better than that so-called professional." No one moved. Employees avoided eye contact, desperately hoping not to be singled out. Reynolds scanned the crowd, his eyes narrowing. "What's wrong with all of you? Didn't any of you learn to play an instrument growing up? All those expensive private schools and music lessons your parents paid for, and not one of you can play a simple Christmas song?" The silence grew more uncomfortable by the second. "Fine," Reynolds said, setting down his empty glass with a thud. What came next would change Mike's life forever. "I'll make you a deal," Reynolds announced, his voice cutting through the silence. "Anyone in this room who can sit down right now and play something decent on this piano." He paused for dramatic effect. "I'll make you the next CEO of Reynolds Enterprises when I retire next year." A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd. Reynolds had always had a flair for dramatic statements, but this was extreme even for him. "I'm dead serious," he continued, seeming to enjoy the shocked expressions around him. "You think running a company is so hard? It's about passion, creativity, and performing under pressure, just like playing this piano. So who's got what it takes?" The room remained frozen. Most employees assumed this was just another of Reynolds' famous pranks, while others worried that attempting to play and failing would mark them for future ridicule or even termination. From his spot near the back of the room, Mike felt a strange sensation wash over him. His hands tingled slightly and his heart began to beat faster. He hadn't touched a piano in over 10 years, not since he'd quit taking lessons during his senior year of high school. For 12 years, piano had been a huge part of his life. His mother, a music teacher, had started him on lessons when he was just 6 years old. He had shown natural talent and progressed quickly, practicing for hours each day. But as college applications loomed, he'd chosen to focus on more practical subjects like economics and finance, setting aside his musical passion. "Nobody?" Reynolds asked, his voice dripping with disappointment and contempt. "Not one person in this entire room has the courage or the ability? And you all wonder why I'm worried about the future of this company." Before he could stop himself, Mike found himself moving forward. He heard his friend Tom whisper urgently, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" But Mike kept walking, drawn to the piano as if by some invisible force. The crowd parted to let him through, watching with a mixture of relief that it wasn't them, and fascination. As he approached the piano, he could see the surprise on Reynolds' face. Well, the CEO said, looking Mike up and down. "And who might you be?" "Mike Chen, sir," he replied, his voice steadier than he expected. "I work in accounting." "Accounting?" Reynolds laughed loudly. "Of course you do. Well, Mr. Chen from accounting, show us what you've got. The CEO position awaits." He made a mocking bow and gestured grandly toward the piano bench. Mike sat down, acutely aware of hundreds of eyes on him. He reached out to touch the keys, wiping away a few drops of spilled wine with his handkerchief. The piano was a magnificent instrument, far nicer than the upright he had practiced on as a child. His mind raced through the pieces he had once known by heart. Would his fingers remember what his brain had tried to forget? He closed his eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the room. It was the last piece he had mastered before quitting, and somehow his hands remembered what to do. The muscle memory was rusty but intact, his fingers finding the keys as if guided by some long-dormant part of his brain. At first, he made small mistakes, a hesitation here, a missed note there. But as he continued to play, something magical happened. The years fell away and the music began to flow more naturally. He forgot about Reynolds, forgot about the crowd watching him, forgot about the absurd promise of a CEO position. He was 16 again, losing himself in the beauty of Chopin's masterpiece. The room had gone completely silent except for the piano. Mike played with growing confidence, the emotional depth of the piece coming through despite his long absence from the instrument. When he reached the final notes, letting them linger in the air before fading to silence, he was almost surprised to open his eyes and find himself still in the ballroom, surrounded by his colleagues. For a moment, no one spoke. Then applause erupted, startling in its suddenness and enthusiasm. Mike stood up awkwardly, his face flushed. He glanced at Reynolds, expecting to see mockery or dismissal. Instead, the CEO was staring at him with an expression Mike couldn't quite read, something between shock and fascination. Reynolds walked over to Mike, the crowd falling silent again in anticipation. The CEO reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. He handed it to Mike with a steady hand. "My office," Reynolds said, his voice no longer slurred or joking. "Monday morning, 8 o'clock sharp." Mike took the card numbly, convinced this was all part of some elaborate humiliation. "Don't be late," Reynolds added, before turning and walking away from the piano. The party resumed slowly around them, the band starting up again but without the piano. For the rest of the evening, Mike found himself the center of attention, bombarded with questions he couldn't answer and congratulations he wasn't sure he deserved. Had the CEO been serious? Would Mike really have a shot at becoming the next head of Reynolds Enterprises? Or was this just a cruel joke that would end with his humiliation, or worse, unemployment on Monday morning? As the party wound down and Mike prepared to leave, he carefully tucked Reynolds' business card into his wallet. Whatever Monday might bring, his life had just taken an unexpected turn. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of something he hadn't realized he'd been missing: passion, excitement, and the thrill of performing under pressure. Monday morning couldn't come soon enough. Mike barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Harrison Reynolds' face. That strange, unreadable expression after he'd finished playing the piano. By Sunday evening, Mike had convinced himself that the whole thing was just an elaborate setup for public humiliation. Why else would a billionaire CEO promise his position to a mid-level accountant he'd never spoken to before? Still, Monday morning found Mike standing outside Reynolds' office at 7:55 a.m., dressed in his best suit, his hands slightly clammy. The executive floor was quiet this early, with only Reynolds' personal assistant at her desk. "Good morning," she greeted him. "Mr. Chen, right? Mr. Reynolds is expecting you. You can go right in." Mike took a deep breath, straightened his tie, and knocked on the heavy wooden door. "Come in," called Reynolds' voice from inside. The CEO's office was as impressive as Mike had imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, walls lined with awards and photographs of Reynolds with various world leaders and celebrities. Reynolds himself sat behind a massive desk, looking remarkably fresh for someone who had been so intoxicated 2 nights ago. "Ah, Mr. Chen, right on time. Please, have a seat." Reynolds gestured to a chair across from him. Mike sat down, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Thank you for meeting with me, sir." "How long have you been with the company?" Reynolds asked, getting straight to business. 3 years next month, sir. I started in the finance department right after finishing my MBA. Reynolds nodded, typing something into his computer. "Your performance reviews are excellent. Your supervisors say you're detail-oriented, reliable, and creative with financial solutions." He looked up from the screen. "But they also note that you don't speak up much in meetings and have turned down opportunities for advancement twice now. Why is that?" Mike was caught off guard by the question. He hadn't expected Reynolds to know so much about his work history. I guess I've been comfortable in my current position. I enjoy the work and I'm good at it." "Comfortable," Reynolds repeated, as if testing the word. "That's a dangerous place to be in business." He leaned back in his chair. "Now, about Saturday night." Here it comes, thought Mike. The punchline to the joke. "How long did you play piano before you quit?" Reynolds asked. Again, not what Mike had expected. "About 12 years. From age 6 to 18. And why did you stop?" Mike shifted in his seat. It was time to focus on college, on my future career. "Piano was just a hobby." Reynolds' eyebrows rose. "Just a hobby? That's not what I heard on Saturday night. That's not what everyone in that room heard." There was a long pause as Reynolds studied him. Then, unexpectedly, the CEO stood up and walked over to a door on the far side of the office. He opened it and beckoned Mike to follow him. Mike's surprise must have shown on his face because Reynolds smiled slightly. "Come on, I want to show you something." Mike followed Reynolds through the door into what appeared to be a private sitting room. The space was warm and inviting, with comfortable furniture and bookshelves lining the walls. But what caught Mike's attention immediately was the beautiful grand piano in the corner, similar to the one at the party, but perhaps even more magnificent. Reynolds walked over to the piano, running his fingers lightly across the keys without pressing them. "Did you know I used to play?" he asked quietly. "No, sir, I didn't." Reynolds nodded as if to himself. "Not many people do anymore. It was a lifetime ago." He sat down on the bench and began to play. The piece was complex and emotional, something classical that Mike recognized but couldn't immediately name. Reynolds played with surprising skill and feeling, his fingers moving confidently across the keys despite his age. When he finished, he remained seated, staring at the keys. "Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. I still practice every morning before work. It keeps my mind sharp." Mike stood there, not quite sure what to say. Reynolds turned to look at him directly. "I was on track to become a concert pianist. Did multiple international tours before I was 20. Then I injured my hand in a car accident." He held up his right hand, and Mike noticed for the first time a slight deformity in 2 of the fingers. "Couldn't play the way I needed to for professional performances anymore. So I went into business instead." "I didn't know," Mike said softly. "No reason you would." Reynolds stood up from the piano bench. "But what I realized on Saturday night watching you play was that somewhere along the way I've lost something important in how I run this company. The passion, the creativity, the soul of it. I've become too focused on the numbers, on growth at all costs." He walked back toward his office and Mike followed. When they were seated again, Reynolds continued. When I made that announcement at the party, I was drunk and acting like a fool. I'm not proud of it. But seeing you walk up and play like that, it woke something up in me. Mike still wasn't sure where this was going. Sir, about the CEO position. I know that was just... It wasn't just anything, Reynolds interrupted. I meant what I said. Mike stared at him. But sir, I'm just an accountant. I don't have the experience to... Experience can be gained, Reynolds said firmly. What can't be taught is courage, intuition, and passion. All things you showed on Saturday night. He leaned forward. Here's my proposition, Mr. Chen. I am indeed planning to retire next year. And I am indeed looking for my replacement. Mike felt lightheaded. This couldn't be real. But I'm not just going to hand you the keys to the kingdom based on one piano performance, Reynolds continued. Instead, I'm offering you a year-long opportunity. For the next 12 months, you'll work directly with me. Half your time will be spent learning the business. Everything from operations to strategy to leadership. The other half will be spent rediscovering your musical talent. I don't understand, Mike stammered. It's simple. I believe that the discipline, creativity, and emotional intelligence required to master music are the same qualities that make an exceptional business leader. I've been looking for those qualities in my executives for years without success. Then you walked up to that piano. Reynolds pushed a folder across the desk. Inside is a formal offer. Your salary will be tripled. Your job title will be Executive Associate to the CEO. You'll have access to everything I do, go to every meeting I attend, and see how every decision is made. At the end of the year, if you've shown the growth and potential I'm looking for in both business and music, the CEO position will be yours when I step down. Mike opened the folder with shaking hands, scanning the document inside. The terms were exactly as Reynolds had stated. This is overwhelming, sir. Call me Harry, Reynolds said with a small smile. We'll be spending a lot of time together. What about the board of directors? Mike asked, his practical mind starting to work again. Won't they have something to say about this plan? Reynolds waved a dismissive hand. I still own controlling interest in this company. The board serves at my pleasure. They may not understand my methods, but they respect my results. He looked at Mike intently. The real question is, are you willing to take this chance? It won't be easy. I'll push you harder than you've ever been pushed before in both business and music. Most days you'll probably hate me for it. Mike looked down at the offer again, his mind racing. This was insane. It was the kind of opportunity that people dreamed about but never actually happened in real life. It was also terrifying. I'll need to think about it, he said finally. Reynolds nodded. Of course. Take the day. But I'll need your answer by tomorrow morning. He stood up, indicating the meeting was over. One more thing, Mr. Chen, Mike. If you accept, you need to be all in. No hesitation, no holding back. The same commitment you once gave to music, you'll need to give to this opportunity. Understood? Mike stood as well, clutching the folder. Understood, sir, Harry. As he turned to leave, Reynolds called after him. Oh, and Mike, if you do accept, your first assignment will be Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. Much more difficult than that nocturne you played at the party. I suggest you start practicing tonight. Mike left the office in a daze, the folder clutched tightly in his hands. As the elevator took him back down to his floor, his mind was spinning with possibilities. Could he really do this? Was he ready to step so far outside his comfort zone? By the time he reached his desk, his decision was already made. He knew he would accept Reynolds' offer, not because of the money, not because of the prestige of potentially becoming CEO, but because for the first time in 10 years he felt truly alive. That evening, Mike pulled his old electronic keyboard out of storage, set it up in his apartment, and began to play. His fingers were stiff, his technique rusty. But as the hours passed, something awakened within him that had been dormant for too long. Tomorrow would mark the first day of the most challenging year of his life. But as midnight approached and his fingers continued to dance across the keys, Mike was filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since he was 18 years old. The first month of Mike's new role was even more challenging than he had anticipated. His days began at 6 a.m. with piano practice in a small studio Reynolds had set up on the executive floor. At 8 a.m. sharp, he would transition to shadowing the CEO, taking notes during high-level meetings, studying financial reports, and absorbing everything he could about running the massive corporation. Most evenings, he would return home exhausted around 9 p.m., practice piano for another hour, then collapse into bed only to start the whole routine again the next day. Weekends offered little relief, as Reynolds had arranged for Mike to take lessons with Anton Volkov, a renowned concert pianist who had retired from performing to teach. "Your technique is sloppy," Anton told Mike during their second session. "Your hands are tense. You are rushing through difficult passages rather than mastering them." Mike had tried not to take the criticism personally. "It's been 10 years since I played regularly," Anton had simply shrugged. "Then we have much work to do." By the end of the first month, the whispers around the office had grown into open speculation. Everyone knew about Mike's strange new position, but few understood it. Some believed he was Reynolds' long-lost son. Others thought he had dirt on the CEO and was blackmailing him. The truth, that Reynolds was genuinely grooming Mike as a potential successor based partly on his piano playing, seemed too bizarre for most to accept. "They're talking about you, you know," said Lisa, Reynolds' personal assistant, one morning as Mike arrived for his daily piano practice. "I know," Mike replied, setting down his coffee. "I can't really blame them. I'd be talking too if I were them." Lisa studied him with a thoughtful expression. "For what it's worth, I think you're handling it all remarkably well. I've worked for Mr. Reynolds for 15 years. I've never seen him take an interest in anyone like this before." Mike smiled weakly. "Thanks. Some days I feel like I'm drowning. There's so much to learn, both about the business and about piano." "You'll get through it," Lisa said confidently. "Harry doesn't waste his time on people who don't have potential." It was the first time Mike had heard anyone else call Reynolds by his first name, and it somehow made the CEO seem more human. Later that morning, Mike found himself in the most intimidating meeting yet, his first board of directors gathering. He sat quietly in a corner, trying to be invisible as Reynolds addressed the 12 men and women who helped oversee the company. "Our third quarter projections are strong," Reynolds was saying, "but I'm concerned about the Wilson contract. Ted, what's the latest?" Ted Barnes, the head of sales, shuffled some papers. "They're still hesitating. Word is they're also talking to Global Systems." Reynolds frowned. "We can't lose this one. The technology division needs that contract to justify the R&D budget for next year." The conversation continued, with various board members offering suggestions. Mike took careful notes, trying to follow the complex discussion about contracts, market share, and competitive positioning. Suddenly, Reynolds turned to him. "Mike, you've been reviewing our financial models. What do you think we should offer Wilson?" The room went silent as all eyes turned to Mike. He felt his heart rate spike. This wasn't just a test. This was Reynolds putting him on the spot in front of the company's most powerful people. Mike took a deep breath and recalled the files he'd studied the previous week. "The models show we can go as low as 8.2 million and still maintain our margin requirements. But I think that's the wrong approach." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Oh, and why is that?" "Wilson isn't just looking for the lowest price," Mike continued, surprised at the confidence in his own voice. "They want innovation. Based on the meeting notes from their last visit, they were most excited about our new cloud security features. If we bundle those in at a nominal cost and emphasize our technology advantages, rather than competing on price alone, I think we have a better shot." The room remained silent. Mike wondered if he'd overstepped. Then Reynolds smiled slightly. "Ted, set up another meeting with Wilson. Let's restructure our proposal along those lines." Ted nodded, looking at Mike with new interest. As the meeting continued, Mike caught Reynolds watching him with that same unreadable expression he'd had the night of the piano performance. When the board meeting ended, several directors introduced themselves to Mike, clearly reassessing who this young man in their midst might be. That evening, instead of sending Mike home at the usual time, Reynolds invited him to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. They were seated in a private dining room away from curious eyes. "You did well today," Reynolds said after they had ordered. "Most people would have frozen when put on the spot like that." "I almost did," Mike admitted, "but you didn't. You took a moment, gathered your thoughts, and offered a thoughtful perspective." Reynolds took a sip of water. "That's what leadership looks like." Mike felt a small surge of pride. "Thank you, Sir Harry." "You're still stiff when you call me that," Reynolds observed with amusement. "It'll get easier." Their food arrived, and for a while they ate in comfortable silence. Then Reynolds said, "Tell me about your family." The question caught Mike off guard. In the month they'd been working together, Their conversations had focused entirely on business and music. My parents immigrated from Taiwan before I was born, Mike said. My father worked as an engineer. My mother taught music at an elementary school. I have a younger sister who's a doctor in Chicago. And the piano. That was your mother's influence? Mike nodded. She started me on lessons when I was 6. She always said I had a gift for it. Yet you gave it up. Mike set down his fork. My father thought music was fine as a hobby, but not as a career. He pushed me toward business or science or medicine, something practical, and you listened to him. I was 18, Mike said with a small shrug. I wanted to make him proud. Reynolds studied him. And did you? Make him proud? I think so. He was happy when I got my MBA, happy when I landed the job at Reynolds Enterprises. Mike paused. He passed away 2 years ago. I'm sorry, Reynolds said quietly. He never got to hear me play Chopin again, Mike added, surprised at the emotion that suddenly welled up in his throat. Reynolds nodded, understanding in his eyes. And your mother? What does she think of your sudden return to the piano? I haven't told her yet, Mike admitted. I wanted to wait until I was sure I could really do this. Do what? Play well again or become CEO? Both, I guess. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. You know, I've been watching you this past month. You're making progress faster than I expected, both in business and at the piano. It doesn't feel fast, Mike said ruefully, thinking of his struggles with Chopin's ballad. That's because you can't see yourself objectively. Anton says your muscle memory is remarkable. And several of my executives have commented on how quickly you grasp complex business concepts. Reynolds took another sip of water. But there's something still holding you back. What's that? Fear, Reynolds said simply. Not fear of failure. I think you've made peace with that possibility. No, you're afraid of success. Mike started to object, but Reynolds held up a hand. You're afraid of what happens if you actually pull this off. If you become the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company at the age of 29. If you reclaim your musical talent and discover what might have been if you hadn't abandoned it. Reynolds fixed him with a penetrating gaze. You're afraid of outshining your father's expectations, of having to redefine who Mike Chen really is. The words hit with uncomfortable precision. Mike remained silent, not sure how to respond. Next week marks the end of your first month, Reynolds continued. It's time to accelerate your training. Starting Monday, you'll begin sitting in on executive team meetings without me. You'll also start working directly with our legal and operations teams to understand those aspects of the business better. Alone? Without you there? Mike asked, concerned. You're ready, Reynolds said confidently. It's time for the rest of the company to see you as more than just Reynolds' strange piano project. You need to establish your own identity as a leader. Mike nodded slowly. And the piano? Anton will be increasing your lessons to 3 times a week. And next month you'll give your first performance. Mike nearly choked on his water. In front of whom? Nothing too intimidating to start. Just a small gathering of executives and their families at my home. A dinner party with a brief recital. Mike felt his anxiety rising. Harry, I'm not sure I'll be ready. You will be, Reynolds said firmly. Remember what I said when you took this position? No holding back. All in? Mike took a deep breath. All in, he repeated. As they finished dinner, Reynolds brought up one last topic. There's something else we need to discuss. The press has gotten wind of our arrangement, Mike groaned. How bad is it? Not terrible yet. Mostly business gossip about my succession plans. But it will get worse as time goes on. People will dig into your background, question your qualifications, create ridiculous theories about why I've selected you. How should I handle it? You don't, that's what our PR team is for. Your job is to focus on learning and growing. Reynolds fixed him with a serious look. But be prepared. This journey we're on is about to get much more public and much more complicated. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Reynolds shook Mike's hand firmly. You've survived the first month, Mr. Chen, only 11 more to go. Mike managed a smile. I'm not just trying to survive, Harry, I'm trying to thrive. Reynolds looked pleased at that response. Good. That's exactly what I want to hear. As Mike headed home that night, he felt a new sense of determination. The challenge ahead was enormous, but for the first time in years, he was pursuing something that felt truly meaningful. Both his father's practical ambitions and his mother's artistic dreams were merging into a path that was uniquely his own. He had no idea if he would ultimately succeed, if he would actually become CEO of Reynolds Enterprises a year from now. But he was certain of one thing. He would never again be the person he was before he walked up to that piano at the company Christmas party. 6 months into Mike's extraordinary journey, the headlines in the business press had grown increasingly dramatic. Reynolds' piano protege, genius or gimmick. Music to lead by. Inside Reynolds' unconventional CEO training. Wall Street skeptical of pianist-turned-executive succession plan. Mike had learned to ignore the noise. Between his grueling business training and increasingly demanding piano practice, he barely had time to sleep, let alone worry about public opinion. What had begun as a bizarre challenge had evolved into something much more meaningful. A complete transformation of his life and identity. The morning of the Wilson contract signing, Mike arrived at the office early, reviewing the final details before the clients arrived. The deal had come together largely due to his strategy of focusing on innovative features rather than competing on price. It would be the largest contract signed during his training period so far, and Reynolds had put him in charge of the final negotiations. Nervous? Asked Lisa as she brought him a cup of coffee. Mike smiled. A little. 6 months ago, I was running spreadsheets and accounting. Now I'm closing a $12 million deal. And playing Rachmaninoff in your spare time, Lisa added with a grin. She had attended his performance at Reynolds' home the previous month and had been genuinely impressed. Still working on that one, Mike admitted. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 was his latest assignment from Anton. A notoriously difficult piece that pushed the limits of his technical ability. But at least I'm not throwing up before performances anymore. Lisa laughed. Progress. The Wilson team arrived precisely at 9 a.m. Mike led the meeting with a confidence that would have shocked his former self. He guided the discussion, answered technical questions, and ultimately shook hands with Wilson's CEO as the contracts were signed. Reynolds had observed the entire process without intervening once. When the clients left, he clapped Mike on the shoulder. Well done, he said simply. Coming from Reynolds, those 2 words carried more weight than a lengthy speech from anyone else. Thank you, Mike replied. Couldn't have done it without the team. Reynolds nodded approvingly at the response. That's lesson number 1 in leadership, share the credit. Now ready for your next challenge? Mike raised his eyebrows. There's more today? The board wants a progress report on your development, Reynolds said. I've scheduled you to present to them tomorrow afternoon. Mike felt a flutter of anxiety. The board members had been watching his unusual training with varying degrees of skepticism. Some had openly questioned Reynolds' judgment in grooming a young accountant with no executive experience as his potential successor. What exactly do they want to hear from me? They want to know if this experiment is working, Reynolds said bluntly. If you're actually developing into someone who could run this company someday. Mike took a deep breath. And what do you think? Reynolds gave him a measured look. I think you've exceeded my expectations in some areas and still have work to do in others. But that's for you to address with the board, not me. That evening, Mike stayed late at the office preparing his presentation. He knew this meeting could determine whether his unconventional training continued or came to an abrupt end. As midnight approached, he finally headed home, his mind still racing with everything he needed to convey. When he entered his apartment, he immediately noticed the light blinking on his answering machine. Pressing play, he heard his mother's voice. Mike, honey, it's Mom. I just read about you in the business section of the newspaper. Why didn't you tell me about this amazing opportunity? And that you're playing piano again. Call me as soon as you get this. I want to hear everything. Mike winced. He'd been putting off telling his mother about his new role, partly because he wasn't sure how to explain it, and partly because he wanted to make more progress with the piano before revealing his renewed commitment to music. Now she had found out from a newspaper article instead. Too exhausted to return her call properly, he sent a quick text promising to call the next day, then collapsed into bed. Despite his fatigue, sleep eluded him as he mentally rehearsed his board presentation and worried about his mother's reaction. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, matching Mike's mood as he hurried into the office. He spent the morning refining his presentation with help from the communications team. By lunchtime, he felt as prepared as he could be. At 2 p.m. sharp, he entered the boardroom. The full board was present, along with Reynolds and several senior executives. Mike took his position at the front of the room, swallowing his nerves. "Good afternoon," he began. "6 months ago, Mr. Reynolds offered me a unique opportunity to train for a leadership role in this company, combining business education with musical training. Today, I'd like to share what that journey has taught me so far." For the next 20 minutes, Mike outlined the key areas of the business he had mastered, from operations to marketing to finance. He discussed specific projects he had led, including the successful Wilson contract. He acknowledged areas where he still needed development, particularly in long-term strategic planning. "Finally," Mike said, "I want to address the question I'm sure many of you have. What does playing the piano have to do with running a corporation?" He paused, making eye contact with several board members. "When I first began this process, I wondered the same thing. But over these months, I've come to understand what Mr. Reynolds intuitively knew. The discipline required to master a complex piece of music is remarkably similar to what's needed to master a complex business challenge." Mike warmed to his topic, speaking with increasing passion. "Both require breaking down overwhelming tasks into manageable parts. Both demand attention to detail while maintaining a vision of the whole. Both need technical precision and emotional intelligence. And perhaps most importantly, both require the courage to perform, to make decisions under pressure when all eyes are watching." He concluded by addressing the skepticism directly. "I know this approach to leadership development is unconventional. I know some of you have doubts. Frankly, I've had doubts myself along the way. But the results speak for themselves in the projects I've led and the growth I've shown. I'm not yet ready to be CEO, we all know that. But I'm on a path that is developing exactly the skills this company will need in its next leader." When Mike finished, there was a moment of silence. Then George Wong, the longest-serving board member and often Reynolds' toughest critic, spoke up. "Impressive presentation, Mr. Chen. But I have one question. If you were to become CEO tomorrow, heaven forbid something happened to Harry, what's the first thing you would do?" Mike felt every eye in the room on him. It was a trap question. If he answered with too much confidence, he'd seem arrogant. If he showed uncertainty, he'd confirm their doubts. He took a breath and gave the most honest answer he could. "I would gather this group, the board and executive team, and listen. I've learned enough in these months to know what I don't know. The collective wisdom in this room represents centuries of business experience. Any leader who failed to tap into that would be foolish." He saw a few surprised looks, then continued. "After listening, I would focus on maintaining the core values that have made this company successful while addressing the 3 key challenges I see on the horizon." He went on to briefly outline those challenges: technological disruption, international competition, and talent retention, and his preliminary thoughts on each. When the meeting ended, several board members approached to shake Mike's hand. Even George Wong gave him an approving nod. Reynolds waited until everyone else had left before speaking. "You didn't tell me about your mother finding out from the newspaper," he said. Mike blinked in surprise. "How did you know about that?" "Lisa mentioned your mother called the office this morning, quite concerned." "I've been meaning to tell her," Mike said, feeling a flash of guilt. "It's just been so hectic, and I wanted to make more progress with the piano first." Reynolds gave him a knowing look. "You're not embarrassed about the piano anymore. You're afraid she'll have expectations you can't meet." As usual, Reynolds' insight was uncomfortably accurate. "Call her," Reynolds advised. "Better yet, fly her out for a visit. Let her see what you're doing." Mike nodded slowly. "You're right. I will." Reynolds looked at his watch. "Now don't you have somewhere to be?" Mike checked the time and grimaced. "Anton's going to kill me if I'm late again." "Go," Reynolds said with a small smile. "The board is convinced. For now." Later that evening, as Mike practiced Rachmaninoff's devilishly difficult third piano concerto, his phone rang. He recognized his mother's number and for the first time in months decided the piano could wait. He picked up. "Mom, it's me. I have so much to tell you." They talked for nearly an hour. Mike explained everything. The Christmas party, Reynolds' challenge, the year-long training program, and yes, his return to serious piano study. His mother listened mostly in silence, occasionally asking questions. "So what do you think?" Mike finally asked when he had finished the whole story. "I think," his mother said slowly, that your father would be very proud of the businessman you've become, and I'm very happy about the musician you're remembering you are." Mike felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. "Reynolds wants me to fly you out for a visit. Would you like that?" "I'd love it," she said warmly. "I want to hear you play again. And I want to meet this Mr. Reynolds who saw what I always knew was there." As they said their goodbyes, Mike returned to the piano with renewed energy. The path ahead was still challenging, with 6 more months of intense training before Reynolds would make his final decision. But for the first time, Mike felt truly confident that he could succeed, not just at becoming CEO, but at becoming the person he was meant to be. He began to play again, his fingers finding their way through the intricate passages of Rachmaninoff with growing assurance. The music filled his apartment as the rain outside finally stopped, and a few stars became visible in the night sky. 1 year after that fateful Christmas party, Reynolds Tower buzzed with unusual activity. The company's most important stakeholders, board members, major investors, executive team leaders, and select members of the press, gathered in the main conference center on the top floor. The room had been transformed with rows of chairs facing a small stage where a grand piano gleamed under spotlights. At the center of all this attention stood a single empty chair. Not just any chair, but the CEO's chair from the boardroom, placed symbolically on the stage next to the piano. In a small preparation room nearby, Mike Chen adjusted his tie, trying to calm his racing heart. Today was the culmination of the most extraordinary year of his life, the day Harrison Reynolds would announce his retirement and name his successor. "Nervous?" Reynolds asked, entering the room and closing the door behind him. Mike managed a small smile. Terrified would be more accurate. "Of the piano performance or the CEO announcement?" "Both," Mike admitted. "What if I mess up the Rachmaninoff? What if the board rejects me even after all this?" Reynolds studied him for a moment. "You know, a year ago you would have been worried about what others think. Now you're worried about letting yourself down. That's progress." Mike hadn't thought of it that way. "I just want to do justice to everything you've taught me." "You will," Reynolds said with quiet confidence. "But before we go out there, I want to make one thing clear. Whatever happens today, whether you become CEO or not, what you've accomplished this year is remarkable. You've transformed yourself as a businessman and as a musician. No one can take that away from you." Mike nodded, touched by the older man's words. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from mentor-protege to something closer to friendship. Reynolds had pushed him relentlessly, criticized him harshly when needed, but had also supported him with unwavering belief in his potential. A gentle knock on the door interrupted them. Lisa poked her head in. "Everyone's seated. We're ready when you are." Reynolds gave Mike's shoulder a firm squeeze. "It's time." They walked together to the conference center. As they entered, a hush fell over the assembled crowd. Mike spotted his mother in the front row, sitting alongside Anton Volkov. She gave him an encouraging smile, and he felt a surge of gratitude for her presence. Reynolds took the podium first. "Thank you all for coming today. 1 year ago I made what many called an eccentric decision. Some of you thought I'd lost my mind." He paused as appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. "Maybe I had. Or maybe I'd finally found clarity about what leadership truly means." He spoke briefly about the company's history, his own journey from pianist to businessman, and his vision for the future. Then he turned to the unusual training program he had designed. "I believe that truly exceptional leadership requires more than just business acumen. It demands creativity, discipline, emotional intelligence, and the courage to perform under pressure. In other words, many of the same qualities found in great artists and musicians." Reynolds gestured toward Mike. "Over the past year, Mr. Chen has undergone an intensive development program, unlike any other in corporate history. He has learned every aspect of our business operations while simultaneously rediscovering and refining his extraordinary musical talent." Mike felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon him. "Today," Reynolds continued, "we will witness the culmination of that training in 2 parts. First, Mr. Chen will perform Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, widely considered one of the most technically challenging pieces in the classical repertoire. Then I will announce my decision regarding the future leadership of Reynolds Enterprises." With that, Reynolds stepped away from the podium and took his seat in the front row. It was Mike's turn. He approached the piano, his legs feeling strangely disconnected from his body. As he sat down at the keyboard, he allowed himself one glance at his mother, whose eyes shone with pride. Then he placed his hands on the keys, took a deep breath, and began to play. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's masterpiece filled the room. Mike had practiced this piece for countless hours over the past months, struggling with its notorious technical demands and complex emotional landscape. Yet as he played now, something different happened. Instead of concentrating on the technical challenges, Mike found himself thinking about the journey of the past year. The early mornings and late nights, the business meetings where he had gradually found his voice, the piano sessions where he had reconnected with a part of himself he had abandoned years ago. His fingers moved across the keys with newfound freedom and expression. The music flowed through him as if telling his own story, the moments of doubt and struggle giving way to determination, the slow building of confidence, and finally, the joy of fully embracing both sides of his nature. When he reached the thunderous finale, Mike poured every ounce of his emotion into the music. The last chord resonated through the silent room, hanging in the air for a long moment before the applause began. It started slowly, then built to a standing ovation. Mike rose from the piano bench, somewhat dazed by the response. He saw his mother wiping away tears, Anton nodding with approval, and Reynolds watching with that same unreadable expression he'd had the night of the Christmas party. As the applause finally died down, Reynolds returned to the podium. The room fell silent once more, the tension almost palpable. Throughout this year, Reynolds began, I have watched Mr. Chen face every challenge placed before him. I have seen him master complex business concepts, lead major initiatives, earn the respect of our executive team, and navigate difficult negotiations. I have also watched him transform from someone who had abandoned his musical talent to an artist capable of the performance we just witnessed. Reynolds paused, surveying the room. The question before us today is simple. Is Michael Chen ready to become the next CEO of Reynolds Enterprises? Mike held his breath. The answer, Reynolds continued, is no. A murmur of surprise rippled through the audience. Mike felt a momentary stab of disappointment, quickly followed by confusion as he saw Reynolds smiling. He is not ready today, Reynolds clarified, but he will be in approximately 5 years, when I actually plan to retire. The tension in the room broke as understanding dawned on the audience's faces. What Mr. Chen has accomplished in 1 year is extraordinary, Reynolds explained, but leading this company requires experience that can only come with time. So today, I am naming Michael Chen as Executive Vice President and my official successor. He will work alongside me for the next 5 years, continuing his development until he is fully prepared to take the reins. Reynolds turned directly to Mike. That is, if you accept the position? Mike stepped forward, emotion making it momentarily difficult to speak. I accept, he said finally, his voice steady. And I thank you for the opportunity to continue learning, both about business and about music. The two men shook hands as the crowd applauded once more. As planned, the formal ceremony transitioned into a reception where board members and executives came to congratulate Mike. George Wong, the board member who had questioned him so intensely 6 months earlier, approached with a glass of champagne. You know, he said thoughtfully, when Harry first proposed this piano-playing CEO idea, I thought he'd finally lost his marbles. I voted against it. I'm aware, Mike said with a small smile. Well, I was wrong, George admitted. What you did today, moving seamlessly from that incredible musical performance to accepting a major executive role, it demonstrated something special, the kind of balance and presence that can't be taught in business school. Thank you, Mike said, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. As the reception continued, Mike found a moment to speak privately with his mother. I am so proud of you, she said, squeezing his hands tightly, not just for the beautiful music or the impressive job. I'm proud because you finally found your own path. Mike hugged her. I couldn't have done it without your early encouragement with the piano. Dad wanted me to be practical, you wanted me to be artistic. Turns out I needed to be both. Later, as the event wound down, Mike found himself alone with Reynolds on the balcony overlooking the city. So, Mike said, 5 more years of your mentorship. Should I be terrified? Reynolds laughed. Absolutely. but you'll survive. He grew more serious. You know why I did it this way, don't you? The whole performance today? Mike nodded slowly. You wanted everyone to see that the two sides of leadership, the practical and the artistic, the analytical and the emotional, aren't separate. They're connected. Exactly, Reynolds said. Most executives can analyze a spreadsheet. Some can even inspire a team, but very few can do both with equal skill. He looked out at the skyline. I searched for years for someone who could preserve what matters about this company while bringing fresh perspective. Someone with both head and heart. No pressure, Mike joked. Enormous pressure, Reynolds corrected him with a smile. But you've proven you can handle it. He checked his watch. Now, if you'll excuse me, I promised Anton a drink. He's still not convinced your left-hand technique is up to his standards. Mike laughed. It probably never will be. Left alone on the balcony, Mike took a moment to absorb everything that had happened. 1 year ago, he had been a mid-level accountant playing it safe, living a half-life. Now he stood on the verge of a future brighter than anything he had imagined for himself. All because he had found the courage to sit down at a piano. A few days later, as the media buzz around his unusual appointment began to die down, Mike received a small package from Reynolds. Inside was a metronome, a traditional tool used by pianists to maintain tempo during practice, with a note attached. For the next 5 years, remember to keep time in both your worlds. Neither too fast nor too slow. The tempo of great leadership, like great music, requires balance. Mike placed the metronome on his desk, right next to the latest quarterly reports. It would serve as a daily reminder of the extraordinary journey that had begun with a drunken challenge and a forgotten passion. A journey that had ultimately revealed not just what he could do, but who he truly was.